Hey, welcome back, Nut Gang. What's up? I know it's been a little while, but we're still going strong. We're not going anywhere. So, this episode is going to be like the first in a little series of influential Americans. Fittingly, for our first series, for our first episode on this series, we're doing George Washington. He's a pretty important person, first president, leader of our Revolutionary Army. I think it'd be pretty safe to say we wouldn't exist without him, but I'm still better. Without further ado, let's just hop into it. Why not? Alright, so in a residence at Pope's Creek in Virginia, on February 22nd, 1732, George Washington was born. He was the first of 6 children to planters Augustine and Mary Bell Washington, even though Augustine also had 4 children from his previous marriage. Among his siblings, he was particularly close to his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington, and he wasn't really particularly close to his mother or father. After some relocations with his family, first to Little Hunting Creek in 1735, and later a Ferry Farm in Fredericksburg, Virginia in 1738, George would inherit Ferry Farm after Augustine died in 1743, at the ripe age of 11. He would also inherit 10 slaves. Meanwhile, Lawrence would inherit Little Hunting Creek and rename it to Mount Vernon, which you can still visit today. It's still standing. I've been there. It's actually a pretty nice place. Because his father died, George wasn't able to get the education Lawrence had in England, so he was enrolled at the Lower Church School in Virginia. There, he found his calling, surveying. So, if you don't know what surveying is basically those people that measure land. They help people make maps by getting all the distances between stuff and all that. Is a pretty important job. You want to scout out some land. At school, he learned math and surveying and was a really talented map maker. And basically, he was a great academic. When George was a teenager, he wanted to be a true gentleman, just like his older brother Lawrence. So, he compiled a lot of rules, over 100, for social interaction that he took from an English translation of a French book called The Rules of Civility. Or maybe in French you may pronounce it The Rules of Civility. And among these rules were, keep your nails clean and always nonchalantly have your teeth clean. Literally. That was one of the things. He literally said, keep your teeth clean, but don't make too much of a fuss about it. When Washington, not being very close to and losing his father at an early age, he looked for a father figure and mentor, and this led him to William Fairfax, Lawrence's father-in-law. William Fairfax got his cousin Thomas to appoint, to get George a job as surveyor of Culpeper County in Virginia. In 1749, even though George hadn't done his apprenticeship yet, he got his surveyor's license from the College of William and Mary, and by 1750, Washington resigned from his post as the surveyor of Culpeper County. By 1752, he bought almost 1,500 acres of land in the Shenandoah Valley and owned 2,315 acres. That's a lot of land. In 1751, something happened that would change George's life. He left the 13 colonies of mainland North America for the first time in his life to go to Barbados with his brother Lawrence. Now, Lawrence was sick with tuberculosis, and George and Lawrence hoped that with the climate of Barbados that could help cure him. But Lawrence would die the next year. So, inspired by Lawrence's militia service, George wanted to enlist too. In 1752, he enlisted into the Virginia militia, beginning his military career. Virginia's Lieutenant Governor Robert Dinwiddie appointed him as major and commander of one of 4 militia districts. At this time, the British and the French were competing for control over the Ohio River Valley, prime real estate that both sides really wanted for themselves because of its fertile land and of its, they love farming. What can I say? In October 1753, Dinwiddie appointed George to his special envoy to tell the French to get the heck out of this valley, because the British claimed a lot of the land that the French were building forts in. It was also to make peace with the Iroquois Indians and to gather intelligence on the French for future operations. Here, Washington found out some cool lore about his family while meeting with the Iroquois leader Tanacharison. His great-grandfather John Washington was called Conotocarius, or Devourer of Villages, by the Susquehannock. and Georgia then called the same. That's actually really insane dad lore. I mean, if I know your like great grandfather was called the Devourer Villages, that's like, I don't know, this is aura, man. In November 1753, Washington reached the Ohio River and was intercepted by a French convoy. Things were friendly, but when Washington asked the French to leave, the French said, no, here's some stuff, go away. In February 1754, Dinwiddie promoted Washington to lieutenant colonel and second in command of the Virginia Regiment. Washington was sent out to confront the French with 150 men, and soon he heard of 1,000 French soldiers at Fort Duquesne, and he decided to go on the offensive. However, the French forces only ended up being 50 men, including their commander, Joseph Colon de Jumonville. So Washington decided to massacre all of them. And because of this, when the French heard this, they wanted their get back. Say whatever you want about the French, but they were a legitimate superpower in the 1700s. I mean, there wasn't an army you really wanted to mess with. Unless you're the British, or the Germans. Because they'll hate each other. On July 3rd, 900 French soldiers attacked Fort Serenity, where Washington was stationed at. This battle ended up with Washington's surrender, and the French decided to pull a little prank on him. Washington didn't speak French and was forced to sign a document which stated his guilt in killing Jumonville. After this, the Virginia regiment was divided and Washington was offered a captaincy in the newly formed regiment, but he decided to refuse and resigned from his commission as it would have been a demotion. This affair actually would kickstart the French and Indian War. We can say that Washington's at fault for it. And in 1755, Washington volunteered to be an aide to General Edward Braddock. His new job, well, it was really what he was doing before, to expel the French from the British land. After a bout of dysentery, Washington and Braddock were ambushed by French and Indian forces, and about 2/3 of the forces were killed, including Braddock. Led by Thomas Gage, Washington and Gage rallied the survivors and allowed some survivors to retreat. Now, Washington got really lucky in this fight. This is where he aura farmed. 2 horses were shot from under him. His coat and hat, like bullet holes in him, was pretty crazy. Like, I don't know. I would have like gone insane. I like panicked and got hit by a bullet. But Washington just stayed calm. That's like literally the definition of aura. And this event really improved his reputation from the whole Jumonville debacle. The Virginia regiment came back in 1755, and Washington was appointed commander. Now here there was some trouble with his higher-ups. With Lord Loudoun in specific humiliating Washington by denying him a royal commission. In 1758, the Virginia regiment was sent to capture Fort Duquesne. He was made brigadier general for this campaign and was in command of one of 3 brigades that were to attack the fort. Though the French had abandoned both the fort and the valley before the attack, and the only casualties were a friendly fire incident that really frustrated George, and he soon resigned and just headed back to Mount Vernon. On January 6, 1759, Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis, widow of wealthy plantation owner Daniel Parke Custis. They met at a party and really quickly hit it off, and they would end up having an amazing happy marriage. They lived in Mount Vernon, where they grew mainly tobacco and wheat. Because of this, and Martha's wealth, Washington became one of the wealthiest people in Virginia and had a massive boost to social standing. Because, you know, rich white guys were like at the top of the game in this era. Now, Washington got some more land from a service in the French Military War. In 1770, Washington inspected lands in Ohio and had William Crawford subdivide it. And here, he may or may not have scammed some of the veterans, saying that their land was unfit for farming. And he also doubled the size of Mount Vernon and doubled its slave population too. I think to 100 people. Washington also got into politics around this time. Due to his wealth and status as a military hero, he was elected to the Virginia legislature, representing Frederick County in the House of Burgesses. He started becoming active in the 1760s and became an outspoken critic of Britain and their policies. He also got into debt around this time, because tobacco wasn't making enough money, and he was buying a lot of luxury stuff in Britain. So he diversified his crops into wheat, flour, and hemp. So I don't think they were smoking weed, they were making like ropes and stuff out of that stuff. He was involved in both the repeal of the Stamp Act of 1765 and the boycotting of British goods after the Township Act in 1769, which led to most of the them being repealed the next year. After they pledged to punish the Massachusetts colonists because of the Boston Tea Party in 1774 with the Coercive Act, Washington and George Mason drafted a list of resolutions through the Fairfax County Committee. One of these resolutions was to ban the Atlantic slave trade. In August, Washington attended the First Virginia Convention and went to the First Continental Congress. He also trained militias in Virginia and also promoted boycotts. The American Revolution would break out on April 19, 1775. Washington attended the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia on May 4th and was nominated as Commander-in-Chief of the Army on June 14th. He was elected into it unanimously the next day, and he even declined a salary for this stuff. Washington chose his staff officers, some of which you might know are Horatio Gates and Nathaniel Greene, Henry Knox, who was colonel, and Alexander Hamilton, who would be his aide-de-camp. Initially, black soldiers couldn't join the war, but after British forces exploited this by promising freedom to slaves if they joined the British, Washington had to change his policy. By the end of the war, about 1/10 of the colonial army were slaves, and some of them even got their freedom. In 1775, the British occupied Boston, led by General Thomas Gage, who you might remember from the French and Indian War section earlier. Washington had a lot of untrained militiamen and ended up training them to become soldiers. When King George III declared that the colonies were in open revolt, Gage was replaced with General William Howe. Washington and his men set up shop in Dorchester Heights overlooking Boston, trying to force the British out. And on March 17th, 8,906 British troops, 1,100 loyalists, and 1,220 women and children were evacuated by boat from Boston, making this Washington's first victory of the conflict. However, this victory was short-lived. Washington returned to New York City, anticipating a British attack from there. And the attack did come, and Washington was forced through Long Island and forced to retreat to Manhattan. Washington was forced to retreat entirely and now only had 5,400 troops. Next was the famous Christian Day attack on the Hessians, when Washington crossed the Delaware River to catch them by surprise, winning a huge battle. They also beat the British at Morristown, causing Gage to retreat to New York City for the winter. Washington stayed at Morristown, and these series of victories brought back patriotic morale and changed the course of the war. After meeting Marquis de Lafayette, and after some battles in Pennsylvania and New York, Washington and his 11,000 strong army went to Valley Forge for the winter, and between 2,000 to 3,000 men died because of the conditions there. Washington was almost removed from Commander-in-Chief because of this, but he wasn't, and Washington was able to gather resources, and some German guy named Baron Friedrich William von Steuben whipped his forces into fighting shape. Soon the French allied with the Americans, and Howe was replaced with Sir Henry Clinton. After a major defeat, the British would largely stop their campaigning in the north and middle colonies and turn their attention to the south. They would occupy Savannah, Georgia, a really important fishing port, and Washington led an expedition against the Iroquois, who were British allies. However, this war would soon be over. Washington and Marshal John Rochambeau marched to Yorktown, Virginia, where General Charles Cornwallis was stationed. The siege lasted a few months, and on October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered, and this basically marked the end of the war. America was now a free country. So after the war, Washington was really excited to go home. He'd only been home 10 days in 8.5 years of fighting. He arrived on Christmas Eve, which was a pretty perfect Christmas present for him. Here, he could be with his family. He remodeled the place into what you see today, and again, it's a really nice place with a lot of really nice views and stuff. A lot of great areas to run around in. I ran around the place. After Shays' Rebellion, which you should watch a video on that, by the way. You should really watch that video. Washington went to the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Even though he at first declined the invitation. He arrived there on May 7th, and the convention began on May 20th. Benjamin Franklin nominated him to preside over the whole thing, and he was eventually elected unanimously. After the Constitution was ratified, Washington was unanimously, a lot of people, everyone loved him. He was unanimously elected to become president. He was actually really anxious about this, and he really didn't want to be president. He was more of an introverted guy. That's what I could tell from this reading about him. But he did it out of duty. This was really a grand undertaking, as he didn't really have any examples or models to follow. He was the model, he was the example. He would have to set the standard for every other president to come. A lot of pressure. He was inaugurated on April 30th, taking the oath of office in New York City. He didn't like hierarchical titles imposed on him, like, Your Majesty, His Highness. He started with a nice and simple Mr. President. Really iconic name. He made his cabinet with Edmund Randolph as Attorney General, Samuel Osgood as Postmaster General, Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Henry Knox as Secretary of War, and Alexander Hamilton as Treasury Secretary. He was actually a really conservative president, and he didn't use his veto powers a lot. He also wasn't a big fan of political parties, and the only nonpartisan president in our country's history. However, Hamilton and Jefferson did form a divide in the nation with the Federalists and the Democrat Republicans, which you might remember me saying those names from our first episode in the Electoral College, which you should also watch, by the way. Washington was partial to the Federalists, actually, and that was shown in a lot of his decisions. So after his first term, Washington really did not want to run for a second term. Personal issues like his health and the plantation really made him want to retire. But Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison pleaded with him to stay, and to help keep the rifting of America's political party at bay, he ended up staying and doing another term as president. After the French Revolution, Washington declared neutrality for that. He also dealt with the Whiskey Rebellion. Again, check out that video, yo. He also had to deal with a Native American war because of land disputes. And he also oversaw the Jay Treaty, a treaty with the British that prevented war in Britain, but it made France not very happy. And this entire thing was really controversial, and it sort of soured the end of his presidency. And by the end, a lot of political forces were blasting him, calling him ambitious and greedy. At the end of his second term, he really did retire, though. This 2-term limit would set a precedent that would be followed by pretty much every president afterward. He also had a farewell speech that I really think you should listen to or read. It's amazing, and a lot of what he talks about in there can be seen today. Maybe I really should do a video on that. After his presidency, Washington became even more of a Federalist, supporting Hamilton in a lot of their policies. He was also the commanding general of the armies until his death. He died on December 14th, 1799, due to a throat infection at Mount Vernon. I'm pretty sure you can still see his tomb as you go over there. I don't think you can go inside, but you can see the outside, I'm pretty sure. Alright, so before we leave, I just have some fun facts about George Washington. You might have heard the story about George Washington and the cherry tree. Now, the story goes that Washington, as a young boy, cut down a cherry tree, and when his father asked who did it, Washington said, "I cannot tell a lie, father," and said it was him. This story is fake. It was invented by a bookseller named Mason Locke Williams to make him look better and to get more sales on his books. Another fun fact is that Washington lost more battles than he won. However, the battles he did win, they were huge, and it was really a big testament to his leadership that he was able to win wars despite losing a lot of battles. He was also the chancellor of the college he went to, the College of William and Mary, until he died. And regarding slaves, Washington was actually quite progressive for his time. He wanted to end the Atlantic slave trade, and after his death, after Martha's death, who died after him, by the way, all the slaves would have been freed. I have some more fun facts I didn't write down, but they're on his Wikipedia page. They're pretty cool. So, Washington and Martha didn't have any children together, but they did raise Martha's children from her previous marriage, Jackie and Patsy. Patsy would die, and if you remember earlier when they said that his daughter died, he used that money from her inheritance to pay off his debts. That's the daughter I was talking about. And Jackie was known as I'm pretty sure he was actually known as a bum. Pretty cool, a pretty fun fact. But he did have children, so Washington did have grandchildren. Washington was also pretty tall. Some people describe him either 6 foot or 6'3". That's pretty tall for a guy, you know. Pretty sure he would have been a hit with the ladies today. He was also like a bit of an introvert, and but he wasn't. And he gave speeches and stuff when he needed to, but he wasn't really excited to do any of that stuff. And he drank some alcohol sometimes, but he thought that anyone who drank too much, who smoked too much, gambling and stuff, swore. He said that those were moral repercussions. Washington, compared to his peers, he actually didn't wear a powdered wig, but he wore his hair curled, powdered, and tied in a queue, like, fashion of that era. And he actually did suffer from a lot of tooth decay, like his teeth weren't very good. And he lost all of his teeth except one. And even though a lot of people said he had like wood teeth and stuff, it wasn't. Yeah, his teeth weren't made of wood. He actually had a metal, ivory, bone, animal teeth, and maybe even slave teeth that he got from human teeth that he got from the slaves. And he was also a really talented equestrian, which is basically, a guy with horses. Jefferson described him as the best horseman of his age, and he liked breeding horses a lot. Yeah, his two favorite horses were named Blueskin and Nelson. That's pretty cool. So in conclusion, what can we take from Washington's life? Well, here we can see that even though he did suffer a lot of adversity and he was forced to do a lot of stuff he really didn't want to, Washington powered through it. Washington, when the duty called, he rose to the occasion, and I think that's something that we should all strive to do. He was really a great man, and he deserves the title of founding father. Without him, we might not even have a country. Alright, y'all. If y'all enjoyed this episode, remember to like, share, subscribe, follow if you're listening to Spotify, and to just, tell everyone you know about this. I don't really care who you tell. Your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister, your father-in-law, your dog's girlfriend. I don't really care. But please just let us grow as much as possible and spread American history to everyone. Thank you for watching, and peace out, Nut Gang.